Okay, so I think we're live. So, hello everyone, good evening, and welcome to the Early Entrance Program Alumni Network, the Study Habits panel. We're really lucky to have three amazing alumni who have very graciously come to share some tips they have about studying, which is perfect timing considering that finals week is fast approaching. And as always, if you have any questions for our panelists, please put them in the live stream chat and we'll get to them as soon as possible. And with that out of the and with all of that out of the way, I think we can start by having our alumni introduce themselves, maybe starting with Nikita.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Nikita Mishra. I graduated from Cal State LA in 2022 with a bachelor's of biochemistry and minored in bioinformatics and computational biology, and I'm now at Stanford completing my master's degree.
I guess I'll go next. Can you guys all hear me right? All right. So my name's Ryan. I did technically it was a bachelor's in poli sci, technically public administration, but I did not do much public admin classes. Minor in econ right now, and I graduated in 2022. Right now, I am being stressed out as a paralegal. That's my full-time profession, and I'm looking to apply to law school soon.
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Alvin. I graduated from Cal State LA in May 2023. I did my undergrad in computer science as well as a minor in mathematics. Currently, I'm doing a master's at Carnegie Mellon in computer science.
Awesome. So I think we can start off with some general questions before we start narrowing down our questions. So in general, do you guys have any general broad study tips that have worked well for you throughout your undergraduate education? And then since all of you are now alumni, how have those habits served you beyond Cal State LA?
The mic's flickering on and off. I guess I can start us off. So definitely, first off, I think I want to preface like my answers for this panel in saying that I don't think there's like an objectively correct study method. For example, I have friends that might want to like sit in the same spot for the entire day for 6 hours, or like others might want to do like Pomodoro timers and like walk around and all that. So I think pretty much like anything that works for you is good. So I'll try and give like a few general things that I like doing whenever I study. Starting off with like, first of all, like before any study session or just like, before the week kind of starts, I always like to like write down all the tasks that I need to get done. So for example, if I'm like, oh, I want to study for like this midterm, right? Or like I want to like do my homework for this class, then I'd write all that down. And then if it's like too large of a task, then I break it down. So for example, like studying, how do you want to study for this math class? Oh, I want to like review the lecture notes. I want to watch the lecture videos, and I kind of write it down into subtasks. And then afterward, then I can like kind of plan ahead, think about which ones do I want to get first, and then I can like cross them off the to-do list as I go through. And then I guess one other like general tip that I have is to like remove distractions when you're studying. So something actually I recently did this semester is like my phone kept buzzing earlier in the semester, and I was like, I can't do this. I just like silenced pretty much all my notifications, and like I completely removed some of them, like from Instagram and such too. So I think doing that helps me stay a little bit more focused, and then you combine that with like the list, and I feel like that's helped me a lot. And definitely that's carried over to grad school. I did a little bit of that, obviously. Actually, I did a lot of that back in undergrad as well, but I think it's like just habits that I've sort of built over time.
As the person not in school right now on this panel, I guess I found that my study habits, well, I guess I can say this about just general study habits is one thing that I always found it wasn't a study habit per se, but it did help with studying, and that's just to keep up with assigned readings or to keep up with assignments because it becomes a lot more difficult to cram later on. And especially for classes where there's a lot of reading, sometimes you're gonna be asked to just you can't possibly do all the reading, and the lectures sometimes don't go into as much depth as the exams require. So if you keep up with the reading, and I'm not saying you have to do every single reading, but you better have more than just the SparkNotes version of the reading down, in order to, if you want, especially if you want to get an A in certain classes. you want to be keeping up with the reading, you want to be keeping up with your assignments. And as to how you do that, it's along similar lines to what Alvin said. Remove distractions as much as possible. And you need to find what work, and also what Alvin said is that you need to find what study tactics work best for you. Because for me, I was the type of person who, if I sat down with a reading, I could sit down for 3 hour chunks and just not be distracted. Some people aren't like that, and that's just fine. And you have to find something that works for you. So I'll also qualify all my answers and say that this is, according to my experience, according to who I am as a person, what suits me.
Yeah, I think I would just echo most of what Ryan and Alvin said. I would also say I took a pretty diverse repertoire of classes as an undergrad and as I'm now in grad school. So it's also important to not be super rigid in how you study. So if you find that, so for example, I guess, like Ryan said, I'm also the kind of person when it comes to certain types of courses, I find it relatively straightforward to sit down and concentrate for like several hours and just kind of get things done. But there are others where I can't do that. Like it just doesn't work for me to sit and stare at equations or stare at certain types of content kind of repeatedly. That's not how it sinks in for me. So I think the largest piece of advice that I think kind of or that I would give, and then maybe it's something I took on more towards the end of my undergrad career and now in grad school, is like knowing what type of studying works for what type of class. So if you're like, I had some physics classes that I had to study for differently. Biochemistry was very different, computer science was very different. So um just keeping that in mind as well. I would also say that it's, I guess, echoing also kind of what Ryan and Alvin said, it's really important to be systematic, and that can mean whatever it needs to mean for you. So, some people are like calendar people. I'm not. Some people are journal people, and that's kind of what I like to do. I think it's really just dependent on your style and I guess my final kind of tip is in terms of like note taking and things of that nature. Don't get too caught up in what other people are doing. I think especially if you're ever on like study Instagram or study talk, especially as like a STEM student, you see people with all these glorious notes with all these colors. None of that crap ever worked for me. I was not like a bunch of highlighters, and I know some people are, and it's great and that's awesome, but I just never was. And I tried and I really tried and it just never worked for me. And when I let that go is when I finally got good at studying and like figured out what I could do, what was effective for me as a student. So that's another, I think, kind of general piece of advice I would give.
One fun study habit I will take, at least in for classes, maybe for classes that are more conceptual and less like apply when you're trying to really understand something though, one general study habit that I really liked was just taking walks. Like go step out, take a walk around like in an area where you obviously you feel safe, but and just think about the material. I did this a lot when I was writing essays, and the professors really wanted me to argue, not only present an argument, but present the strongest counter argument and kind of just say why that isn't valid. Going on walks and kind of just not staying in place for me was, even though I do have a capability to focus for hours on end, it's just having walks to just think about things I found really helpful and just being on the move. So that's a fun study habit that I still use in a professional work setting. Obviously I can't step outside, but I just circle around the office a bit, and I guess you could call that a study habit even though it's for work.
Well, thank you all for your answers. And like all of you said, studying differs per person, studying differs per class. That's why we tried to have a panel with as diverse of panelists as possible. We got someone from poli sci, we got someone from computer science, we got someone from biochemistry. So we hope you guys can give pretty comprehensive advice. And for our next question, we wanted to ask something a bit more specific. Namely, I think Nikita, you touched on this already, but do you find keeping a calendar or schedule is helpful? And if so, do you use those to organize? How do you use those to organize your assignments? And just as another last question, what do you guys think about time blocking?
What is time blocking? What do you mean by that?
I assume it's like the Pomodoro technique, or maybe in a calendar, putting like aside time for specific tasks.
Oh, I see. I think I get what you mean by that. I don't time block. But I do keep a list because I am in a, if you want, for those who want to go into the field of law, deadlines are very important. 1 minute late, it's not like 1 minute late and the whole thing is late. yesterday we were appealing a decision, and my boss said she just said the deadline is 4:15. It's not 5 o'clock, it's 4:15, because if it's even 1 minute late, then our whole case gets thrown out. And so for me, I have to keep a calendar, and I have to keep a calendar, because if I miss one of those deadlines, I'm screwed. I also need a calendar because the way that our law firm works is we're very high volume. That's just the nature of the field of law that we practice. And so we'll have hearings day in, day out sometimes at times. And so I can't possibly keep track of in my head of who I need, of which line I need, who I need to call at what time, and what their phone number is, or what case it's going to be on. I have to write these things down. And keeping a calendar for high volume things is very helpful. But it doesn't necessarily translate to a schedule, because I just I'll just maybe I guess you could say I do schedule, in the sense that when I look at my calendar the day, I go, okay, these items are due. I have these hearings at this time. This is how I'm going to organize my time around it. So I guess in a way you could schedule, but it's more of like an agnostic approach to scheduling.
Yeah, my initial answer was actually going to be like more leaning no, but then Ryan just reminded me, like, beyond like scheduling, like studying, I do keep a calendar of like major events or such. So for example, like this event here, I have it on my Google Calendar, and I keep that pretty active. But in terms of like, do I like write on my calendar, I want to study for this here, this here, this here? I don't really. Like I've tried using things like Notion, and I know like some people really enjoy that stuff, but like kind of, I think same as what Nikki mentioned, it's not for me. I just prefer, like, I just write it on a list, and then I keep that list around, and then like when I have like time to work, I just go on the list and I just pick something and I do it. As for like time blocking, so I like every now and then, like I will think, oh, maybe I'll like switch to the Pomodoro method or something. So I don't really like keep a consistent method of studying, actually, because I feel like sometimes it gets a little boring to do the same thing. At least for me, this is like very subjective, but I'll like switch up study habits. So like I think over the weekend I was doing some Pomodoro cycles, and then yesterday, like when I was like coding, I was like laser focused and just sitting there for a few hours. And then I stayed on campus until like almost 12 a.m. last night. And like while I was doing math, and like statistics and stuff, like when I needed to think of the problems, I'd like wander around and walk around, kind of like what Ryan said. So I kind of like switch between everything. I think, if time blocking works for you, you should try it. Or I guess even if it like doesn't work for you and you haven't tried it before, I would suggest like giving it a shot, because it might be helpful for some people. But in general, the end goal is like to get yourself to be productive and do things. So if you think, oh, it's a hassle for me to keep a schedule, a calendar, it's like extra work, then I just recommend don't do it.
I think Alvin and I kind of probably study the same way. I also don't put like studying for like this class from 2 to 5. It just don't work for me. I feel like I always have meetings or something that'll come up, like it'll get pushed, and then I just feel like, oh, I didn't start at 2, I started at 2:30, and everything else gets pushed. I can't stand it. It just annoys me, and I don't like it. And so I don't time block. It just doesn't, that's not how I function. I think I also am pretty busy, so I don't usually have like 3 hours at a time unless it's like 9 p.m. to 12 a.m., which I'm not putting that on my calendar. And in terms of like, I think I also, my schedule, and calendar is just events, meetings, like it's more like a work calendar. And I keep my school, like class studying habits a little bit separate from the Google Calendar, that I use for work. So I guess the direct answer to the question is like, no, I don't really use a calendar or schedule to organize my assignments. And I didn't do that in undergrad either. I didn't find it necessary. I actually didn't start using Google Calendar until this year. Um, so it was just, for me, it was straightforward enough. Like a lot of classes are pretty well structured in terms of like assignments. We usually do it the same time, like same day of each week or around the same time. So it wasn't necessary for me to have, like there weren't enough moving parts where a calendar would be particularly helpful. And then keeping it just would start updated, and then it would just not be by the, a couple weeks in. And then in terms of, I guess, like advice about keeping a calendar or schedule. I think Alvin just kind of said it. It's, it's up to you, right? It's like if you are someone who wants to put assignment deadlines in, that helps you remember, like keeps you kind of it gives you like time to say that, okay, this is when I'm going to work on something or whatever that it might be. That's great. It also might, I've heard with a lot of people, it helps you kind of be a little bit more protective of your time and say like, no, I need to study during this time, and so I can't take a meeting. Um, but again, it's person to person. So my job is, and I was working 3 jobs my senior year of college, so it just didn't make sense for me to like have kind of really structured time because I needed to be at different places at once. And now my job is very flexible, so I don't know when meetings will come up. So I don't like having that on my calendar. But if you do, that's totally fine. I think that the only recommendation I would have is I just like having things that are color coded. So you kind of know, like in general, if you're looking at your calendar, what type of task will take up the majority of your day. And I'd also say, like, if don't as much as you can, if you have like, don't schedule 6 things at the same time. Like you don't want to look at that. You can't make all those things happen at once. So just put on your calendar what's important and what you know that you'll be able to get to, or what you need to get to.
Awesome. And then I think that a theme that a lot of you mentioned throughout the past 2 answers was kind of staying focused and removing distractions. I know that a couple of you mentioned in your first answers that removing all distractions from your study area was a pretty important study habit that also carried on beyond Cal State LA. On that note as well, I guess before you start studying, even to the best of your abilities, when you try to remove all distractions, sometimes distractions will still come up when you start studying. How do you deal with those distractions? And then how do you kind of bounce back from those distractions, and how do you like stay focused on your work?
I'll start. So this is first of all, Alvin touched on this. Mute your phone. First of all, just mute it. When my phone is on Do Not Disturb, I have a list of people that it's like family members and very close friends that I say only these people I will receive. I will receive phone calls from my parents. I will receive phone calls from my sister and these friends. I'll receive texts from my parents, but everything else it's blocked. No. That's the first piece of advice. The second piece of advice that I would, at least in my experience, I would find is if you can push through like the first 15 to 30 minutes, studying becomes a lot easier after that, at the very least until you get tired. So the first 15 to 30 minutes is the biggest struggle that you're going to have to overcome. And for me, who does a lot of reading, the way that I do this is I just constantly try to keep myself engaged with the text. I ask why, especially when you read philosophy texts and later on when you read legal cases, you're always going to have to ask yourself, why is this here? Why is this here? Why is this here? Because these writers don't put extraneous information in for no reason. They have a reason to. So even if it seems extraneous at the moment, you're going to have to, it might pop up later on. And so by constantly asking yourself the why is this here? Why is this here? Why is this here? And this works especially if you're getting bored. I find it helps keep me engaged and it helps me get a better understanding of what I'm reading so that I don't have to revisit it and go, wait, and later scan the text and go, where was that mentioned earlier? Another thing that I also really find helpful is don't eat too much before you start studying. You can't study when you're asleep, okay? You can't study when you're asleep, and certain foods, they just make you feel sleepy. So don't do that. Don't do anything that would inhibit your study habits prior to. So that would be, take a nap if you have to. Don't eat heavy foods. Maybe, oh, I wouldn't say don't play sports, but don't do anything that exhausts you out right before you go to study. And I guess one other quick study tip is if you're feeling sleepy, generally speaking, it's better that you take a nap or like catch some shut eye before you go back to studying. Unless it's really urgent, I would recommend that you're probably not going to get effective studying anyway, and you're going to be so distracted on how tired you feel that at that point it's just better that you go to sleep, and that will help your studying out in the long term, at least in my experience.
Yeah, so I think Ryan already kind of touched upon a decent few things that I had in mind. Really, there's like like the two categories are like physical ones and like mental ones, right? So physical distractions, like for example, if you're in the EEP kitchen and you are trying to study and everyone is like throwing things or like playing cards, like slapping the table, like you are probably not going to get any work done. Like I don't think I've ever been super productive in the EEP kitchen. So like definitely find like a good spot first, right? I guess at Castanoy, maybe like there's like the quiet study room, like right across. There's like the library. You can go like up to the higher floors and it's usually quieter there. Or like at home, you know, in your room or something. Just like find like a quiet space that you think won't have many physical distractions, right? So like get your phone not on the table as well. I usually just like to throw it in my backpack or something because if it's like on the table, then it's very easy for me to like grab it and check. But if it's like somewhere hard to get, then it makes it a little more difficult. Um, and there's also things like you know, sometimes you might like have an urge to like wander off on your laptop too. So something I actually tried at one point. There's like Chrome extensions as well. Like if you go on YouTube too much, you can like block it for yourself. So you can try that. I don't have that on anymore. I tried it for a short period of time. And like when it's more annoying for you to like open up YouTube because like you have this blocker thingy on you, then you know you can kind of get yourself to focus as well. And then I guess like for like mental, like if you have something on your mind and you need to clear it, and you feel like it's really distracting you, I think something that is helpful is just like try and sit there and like do nothing or like go like walk around or do something. I think there was like this like psychology experiment or something where like people were put in a room with like nothing to do but like a button to shock themselves or something. And I think it was something like a good bit of people like would press the button because they were presumably because they were bored and had nothing to do. So like if you sit there, sometimes for me too, I'll just like sit in this chair, like instead of playing games or anything, I'll just sit here doing nothing. And then eventually I'm like, yeah, I should probably study. Or like last week, I think my power went out for a few hours, like in the morning. And I was like, well, shoot, I don't even have internet to do anything. So then all I could do was study statistics and do math. So if you can like eliminate the distractions, then that helps a lot.
I would say, yeah, I would echo a lot of what Alvin and Ryan said. I think, I mean, as much as you can eliminate, do that. So one big thing is like no one probably most for most people like your Instagram DMs you don't need to read them right away, right? Like your Snapchats, you don't need to see them right away, whatever, like your Discord notifications. So for me, I'm really mindful about what notifications I allow on my phone. But I'm gonna actually come at this at a little bit different angle. So I have in undergrad as well, I had a patient-facing job. So my phone could not be away from me because if someone had a problem or something like that, like it had to come to me and I had to answer my phone. And now I still have that, and there's also another aspect of the stuff that I do that I have to just be available via email during large parts of the week. And so one, I guess, piece of advice I would give is that things can only distract you as much as that you let it. So if I have to step away from study, I've been studying for like 2 hours or something like that, and I have to step away to like answer a meeting or to like get on the phone with someone or to go to the hospital. I want to come back to studying as soon as I possibly can. And I usually make that pretty clear in how I'm talking to the person who distracted me, that like I have to go. So that's I think one thing to keep in mind is that like, sometimes you do need to get up, sometimes something is happening and you have to like go see what's going on or whatever that might be. And don't sit around and feel bad about it. And don't use that as an excuse that like, okay, I stepped away for 5 minutes. Now I can not do anything for an hour. Like that's not how it works. So, I think I would just keep that in mind as well. And then in terms of, I guess, how I go about eliminating distractions besides the notifications and the phone, I think one thing that works for me is like I just kind of try and keep my space, whatever if that's my desk at home or like somewhere else, just I only have out the things that I need to study. So I usually, for example, there are certain classes where I have like a physical textbook and just need to take notes in the textbook. And so instead of having my laptop out, I'll have my iPad out with that I can just search up things like quick, clarifications or whatever, because I don't need my laptop in front of me. So just having the things that I need to be looking at in front of me helps me a lot. Um, and I think also, like just knowing kind of, I guess we talked about this earlier, but knowing what I wanted to accomplish that day. I think when you sit down and study and are like, oh, I'm just going to study today, like we'll see what I get done. I don't recommend that approach. I think saying like, okay, I'm gonna, today I would like to get through review these lectures, or like Brian has been touching on, like finish this part of the reading or these readings. And I think having that sort of like a relative plan in mind of, okay, this is what I'm going to do first, and then I'll try looking at, the lecture videos or whatever it might be. I think when you approach it with a plan, it's a little bit less, I found myself like less sort of prone to getting distracted when I knew what I wanted to accomplish kind of in the time that I had available to me. And so yeah, I would give those pieces of advice of like, try if you're someone who kind of has to have their phone on them or has to be in a distracted environment, like try and let things pull your focus only if they absolutely need to, and two, don't let things pull your focus for too long. And then the second thing is just when you're studying, approach it with a plan and know what you want to accomplish. And knowing what you want to accomplish will hopefully um, help encourage you to not sort of poke around in other spaces too much until you're done with what you need to do.
Well, thank you all for your answers. And on a very similar topic of distractions, how important do you feel your study location is? I know Alvin touched on it, but for all of you, like where do you study, for example? What's the best location and how important is it?
Don't study where you can fall asleep. I think that should be a given, but I don't know how many times where I've told myself, okay, I'm gonna get some work done in my bed, and that work never gets done. I keep telling myself that still to this day, I still do that, but do not study in your bed. Study, don't study anywhere comfortable. Because okay, maybe I shouldn't say it that way, but don't study anywhere that's too comfortable. For me, when I study, I prefer it to be just a little bit cold, a little bit colder. I prefer it just because I tend to focus better in that environment. Um, and but for me, study location doesn't really matter. I've that I mean, I've studied. I can get studying done on when when I'm on public transit. I can get studying done when I'm just the only place is just not in my room, but I can get studying done anywhere else. And so at that point, for me, it's not so much about location, but more so about being prepared to get work done. And that I find always having something to do when you know you're going to be busy that's just an important part of studying because it's an important part of being prepared. And for me, for someone whose location doesn't matter, I'll just get it done whenever I can get it done.
Yeah, so to kind of bounce off what Ryan just said, it's been like 20 degrees out here, man. It was like I think it was like the first time it was like snowing a little outside. So it's cold here. You can see me wearing multiple jackets. But yeah, about study location, I think like as Ryan said, like don't be too comfortable. Like you want to have a place where it's like you're not distracted, it's not like horrible. But for me, like past like the basics, it doesn't matter too much. So actually what I like to do here at CMU is there's like a lot of really good study locations. Like even among like our computer science building, there's like tons of floors. So every now and then, like if I feel like, oh, like I'm kind of getting stuck here, I'll like walk around and then I'll choose a new study spot. So like, oh, I'll move from the 8th floor to the 6th floor, or like I'll move from this corner to that corner. Personally, I also really like sunlight. Uh, maybe that's not like CS major thing. But like I think having light is good. So I like areas where it's pretty bright, even if there's like some people there, as long as it's not too loud, I don't mind either. In fact, I actually think it's quite nice when you're around people who are also focused. Because at least for me, like what that does is it guilt trips me into like working too. Because if everyone around me is working, so especially like for my program, we have like a lounge, kind of like the EEP lounge and kitchen. Like people here are like everyone works really hard. And so like when everyone is on a table, like a long, like one of those long tables with like a bunch of chairs and everyone's really focused, then you kind of end up doing the same thing. So that's actually something that's been pretty good for me. Yeah, the overall answer is like find somewhere that's like decent enough for you to focus and get stuff done. and that's enough, I think.
Yeah, I would actually agree with both of you. And I would say for me, it's a little bit different depending on what I'm studying for. So, um, I think, like Ryan said, I don't really care too much about the location. My only answer is not my bed. And has been a case even when I was in school prior to EEP. Like I just never studied in my room, and I live in a studio, but I don't study on my bed. Because I just it won't happen. Like I won't get studying done. So, but beyond that, I don't know that I have luxury of being like sometimes it's just this is the time I have to study and I'm like across campus or I'm not near a library or I'm in the lab. Like you just don't really I don't have much of an option of like where I could have the luxury of being. So as long as I was like mentally prepared to sit down and do work. And so I sat down and did work. Like that's kind of just what it is. Um, and I don't think I've ever been someone who's like particularly obsessed with my study location, with the huge caveat of except when I was studying for the MCAT. For that, it was very much like I had my one place in my house, and my parents used to joke that I was taped there. Like I was always, it was never studied anywhere else except that one spot, which was my desk in my room. And so, I guess I can kind of see both ways of like how some people have want like one specific study location, but I actually think that's not good. Like you should not only be able to study if you're in one really set environment. I think it's probably a little bit better to approach it with the idea of like you kind of want to be in one specific mindset, and it's good to be in somewhere that's quiet, definitely not e-kitchen kind of loud. But somewhere quiet, somewhere where you are doing yourself a favor by minimizing distractions. And like for me, a large part of in undergrad, I don't really like studying around people I know. I've never been like a group studier. And so I never was someone I don't really love studying with friends. I just like to study. I mean, being around other people is fine, but kind of doing my own thing and being more in my own lane was the environment that I preferred. So yeah, I think it's as important as you let it be. But I think it ties probably more back into the distraction piece of like you want to be conscious of the place that you're put, like how, what you're associating with when you're trying to focus, right? You don't want to be around a bunch of rowdy people. You also don't want to be around somewhere that your body naturally associates with sleeping. So just when you're trying to figure out where to study as much as you can, just do yourself a favor and make it a place and that you can really get some good productive work done.
Great. I think in all of our previous answers, there's kind of been some hints of answers to this following question, but we're going to go a little bit broader now. I guess we can talk forever about studying tips or like studying habits or give suggestions about what are the best things to do when you're studying, what are like certain like distractions that you need to minimize. But I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to motivation. So if somebody doesn't have motivation, it's going to be very difficult for them to like sit down and actually get some work done. So I guess besides the very short-term motivation of like getting an A or passing a class or even something as simple as like actually getting the work done, is there anything bigger that motivates you when you study, or is there any like bigger goal that you're studying towards?
So I guess I can start this time. I think the biggest motivation, I mean for me and maybe in general too, I think is like interest in a topic. I feel like whenever I'm taking a class that I'm really interested in, like it's actually fun to study. Like I'm doing the homework or something, I'm like, oh, I wonder like what this topic is about. Or like even if it's not mentioned too much in class in detail, I'll be like, oh, maybe I should try Googling and seeing if I can find out something new and try and learn something. Um, Whereas if there's like a class that you really hate, so like obviously there's GEs and you can't really avoid those in undergrad. I'm glad I don't have to deal with them now because like I enjoy all my classes right now, I'd say. If it's like a class you don't really care about, it is a little challenging. Like I will say, it's if you don't have as much interest, then it's probably harder. For me personally, like my kind of internal motivation is that like I like telling myself like I generally do enjoy learning a little bit of everything. So I'm like pretty broad in terms of interests as well. But I kind of think like, oh, I should be capable of like learning this other topic too. And like by kind of thinking that and thinking like, oh, you know, I kind of want to like learn more about what, you know, how or like how people in this field think. So for example, like physics or something, right? You know, even if that's not my main interest and that's not something I want to keep doing, like I can still find interest in it. I can think like, oh, like it's pretty cool. Like, you know, people who've done physics are like, you know, doing things that are applicable to the real world. Or like I can think like, oh, I can like throw something in the real world and now I can finally understand precisely like what's happening. So I do always try and like, you know, come up with some interest in the things that I'm learning. It's a lot easier when it's things like in a good major that you choose. But in general, that's one of the main things I look towards.
I'll go next. Touching on what Alvin said, you guys really chose us with an existential question here, huh? I just want to point that out. But you got to enjoy what you're doing. That's one of the key principles is that you got to enjoy what you're doing, and if you don't, enjoying is going to be a lot harder. Um, Also, just branching out every once in a while is helpful for studying because if you have information overload on one thing, you might just get sick of that thing for a while. And if you switch to like just briefly learning about something else that might intrigue you to even if it doesn't intrigue you to go back to your original thing that you were studying, at the very least, it gives you a nice change of pace, which can be helpful. And just also one thing about I guess one thing about studying that I found just in terms of just studying and working is that one thing that's not helpful for me, I guess one thing that doesn't motivate me is just like to study for the sake of studying. You can't do it for the sake, you can't, sometimes you just can't study for the sake of ego. You just can't because it's gonna backfire. And in my experience, I found that whenever I've studied because other people, it feels like sometimes it works that other people are studying, so I have to study, but other times it doesn't. The motivation differ. What I'm trying to say without imposing too much of what I personally believe is that the motivation differs for everyone. It's kind of on you to find out what makes what makes you just what makes you like doing what you're doing. How do you find how do you find meaning in it? And so but for me personally, it's just like don't think too much. If I don't put too much value on, if I don't put too much of like my identity in like my studies or my work, I actually find myself studying better because in a sort of sense, it's like I'm a little bit detached from it, but that strengthens my connection to the work that I'm doing, if that makes sense. It's a little bit abstract, and going down that would be a 15-minute discussion with me alone, and I'm not gonna. I'll spare you guys that, so I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, I think echoing what Ryan and Alvin said, I think interest is, always going to be your biggest driver, right? Like when you do something you like, you want to do more of it. And one thing I think, Ryan, your point was really excellent that like I said earlier, I took a really diverse set of classes. I did kind of a little bit of everything in undergrad. And that helped a lot. Like kind of sometimes I was doing like really like kind of advanced physics classes. Other times I was doing advanced chemistry classes. And obviously this is all in the same semester. So what it helped me do was I was like never if like the idea of physics made me want to throw up in the moment, fine. I can do biology, I can do like there's other things that I can do that are still productive and I can come back to physics when I'm feeling it more, basically. And that worked for me because like like Ryan said, if you're sitting there and studying for hours and hours of one single thing, like you will get sick of it and eventually things are it's just not going in your brain anymore, right? You're just being counterproductive. So it's better to switch your time to something else. So I think when you're structuring your course load and thinking about, how to spread out your GEs, thinking about how you want to spread out your minor classes, etc., um, just do so, don't, or my advice, I mean, to each their own, my advice would be like, don't take a huge stack of like really hard CS classes or really hard, and only that. Have something where you can pull your focus, that can pull your focus for a little bit and just not be, kind of not have like a monosyllabic term in class and in terms of classes. That may not even be in the form of class if you have like like a job or like a hobby that you can use as like something to kind of help you center yourself. I think that can help drive your motivation. And there's a couple other points I wanted to make. I think for me, I when I was thinking about my study motivation, especially in undergrad, I just didn't want to regret not studying because I knew that when I like went into an exam or like went into class and the feeling of like that, I feel like everyone's had this moment when you sit and you look at the test and you're like, I have no idea how to answer any of this. That like feeling of fear, like anxiety that sort of washes over you. That sucks, right? Like it like objectively is an unpleasant way to kind of start a midterm or whatever it might be. So I really found a lot of drive and like I just want to make sure that I go in knowing that I did it like to what I in the time that I had and in the capacity that I had, I did what I could, right? I studied as much as I could. Um, and that actually helped me a lot with my test anxiety, which I don't think which when in the school I was prior to EEP was pretty high, and I was able to sort of taper it off by keeping that in mind. And I also want to say, like, if you're studying just for the grade or you're studying for academic validation, I heard a lot of people be like, that's not that great. Sometimes it's fine. Like, do you know what? Like, everyone takes classes they hate. Everyone takes classes where you just don't want to be there. Sometimes it is just for the A. And so if that's what's going to get you through and going to get you to study, it's okay. Like, if ideally that's not your only reason for studying ever, right? You want to have an interest in something. But I also want to say, like, if you don't always need to have like some big, like deep motivation to study. Sometimes wanting to get a good grade is fine enough. Like you don't need to have anything more than that. Um, so yeah, I think that's what I would say about that.
I'm gonna chime in real quick. Nikki was like, don't take like a ton of CS classes at once. I've sort of been doing that for a while. I think like my junior and senior year, I was taking like pretty much like all CS classes. So I was taking like 5 or 6 of those, maybe like coupled in with like a few math classes each semester. So like I guess if that's what interests you, which is what interests me, which is why I'm doing a master's, right? I think it's okay. But I do agree with like the switching like mindsets thing. Like if you're taking like all classes that are really, really similar and like you're the type of person that like it's not like your main interests, and I feel like that's gonna give you a lot of pain. So for example, like if you don't really like theory and math and you're taking like all math classes at once, then that's gonna be really bad. But for example, like right now, the 2 CS classes I'm taking here at CMU are like really different actually. So like machine learning, there's like a lot of math, statistical theory, whatever, and all that stuff, right? And then the other one's like distributed systems. So it's more like, oh, like given a bunch of like computers or whatever, like how do we like scale the system up? So like how do we go from like one laptop to like supporting Facebook or something massive, right? And so those are like diverse enough for me to where like if I switch between them, I feel like I'm getting like a completely fresh like mindset. So whenever I study, like occasionally, right, like for exams, okay, I'll study for like one class like hours in a row. But generally what I do like to do is like cycle around them. So I'll do like a little bit of this class, a little bit of that class, and kind of like interleave my studying instead of like blocking out like an entire few days for one class at a time. So I do think that helps in that regard.
Let me also chime in. And to what Nikita said, it's that absolutely. Sometimes you're going to be taking classes that you hate. Sometimes you just need that A. That's absolutely fine. But I would say that, and I've done that before. But you shouldn't make that your default. That shouldn't be your go-to. Um, and just sort of if that is your default, then maybe it's time to just kind of maybe it might be time to like reassess. It's like, okay, what is this something that I have to do? Are these all GEs that I must get done or prereqs that I must get done? And if so, sometimes you're just gonna have to suck it up and suck it up and get it done. Um, and that's just kind of the main thing that I want to touch on is that sometimes you just got to do it, and it sucks, but discipline is a study skill, and that's why there's so much emphasis on removing distractions because you're going to have to do things that you don't like. So I forgot what the other thing I was going to say. It was building off what Alvin said, but maybe it'll come back to me later.
And yeah, I've also obviously like done classes for the A when they're like G's, like things that like, or like the class is really bad, or like it happens. So you just kind of got to deal with that.
Oh, this is what I was going to say. So I was pretty fortunate to have a pretty diverse set of classes throughout all the semesters that I was at Cal State LA, even if I didn't necessarily enjoy it at the time. My last year I took, my major was poli sci obviously, but I took a stats class, an intro to CS course, and an accounting class. And those actually have helped me. Those have helped even if I don't have even if I don't have Alvin's knowledge of CS. It still helps because the thinking that you learn in CS applies to other this thinking that you learn in CS applies to law in a certain sense as well. If you're assign I forgot what the technical terms are, but if you're like doing like a a mode, is that what it's called? Or what is it called? The thing that you can just plug back in you can define a term, make it do these steps, and then you just plug back in. What's that called?
Like a function or like
Yeah,
recursion or
I
something?
guess a function. Yeah. I mean, like that kind to a certain extent that does appear in law as well. And so that's helpful. And learning a little bit of accounting makes me go, oh, wait, now maybe it makes a little bit more business sense when I have to factor in all the things that they do because our clients are insurance companies. And so we would have to factor in their decisions and help them take their interests into account when we give them advice. That's helped me. And so you want to learn also, you generally speak like 80, I would say like 70 to 80% of the time, you want to study because you enjoy learning and you want to retain this information long term. I don't use algebra at all. Well, maybe not at all. Maybe like 5% of my working life, I'm using like algebra to calculate something. And even that's just going on Desmos to figure out what I'm doing. But it still helps because that knowledge can be applicable. So if you come into that mindset of you never know if this is going to be applicable. Like I've heard of Nobel Prize laureates in medicine stitch something up that they used from watching seamstresses. You never know when the knowledge is going to be useful. So if you just humble yourself a little bit and keep an open mind as to this could be potentially useful down the future, especially for classes that aren't within your major, you can find that you take a lot out from diversifying your experience, your academic experience.
Well, thank you all for your really wonderful answers. I know, Ryan, you were questioning why we asked this question, but I think it was exactly for that point. Lots of really great insight. I don't think I ever thought of the point that a diversity of classes can actually help you study, but it's definitely something that, looking back on my own academic career, everything does help. Like even things that I learned in my least interesting class, which I'm sorry, Ryan, is poli sci 1000. Uh, it definitely helps. So it's definitely something that I'll look forward to doing in the future. And then for our next couple questions, we wanted to ask some more specific questions about study habits. So one thing that I wanted to ask in particular, because I've never tried it, is what's your guys' opinion on self-studying, which is skipping classes and studying the material yourself? And what type of classes might this work best with? And if you guys don't do self-studying, maybe in later you can tell us how you take notes.
Let me just say this. There are certain classes that you can self-study for and certain classes that you cannot. And this generally applies to the undergrad level. I don't know how it goes to when you're in more higher education, when you're in like graduate school or professional school or even doctorates. But philosophy classes, it's really hard to skip and just read the material on your own because you benefit so much from going to class and discussing the material with someone else. So I think for my for my favorite professor, Dr. McClendon, that's a plug for his classes, by the way. Go take his classes. They're great. Even if you're not poli sci or philosophy, because so enthusiastic, but okay, I digress. Even in those classes, I would always show up and just be prepared to discuss. Now, the classes that I did skip were classes that it was more so mastery of a skill it was more so mastery of a skill that you didn't really need to be in the classroom for. So accounting, when I took it my final semester, the senioritis influenced it, and I skipped like 2/3, maybe 3/4, maybe even 90% of the classes, and I still got an A in the class. And did I learn as much as I should have? No, but I did learn something. And at that point, I was just taking the class to fill the units and to just grab some general knowledge. So I would say it fulfilled my general purpose. But in certain classes, self-studying really does help when you just need to practice a skill over and over and over again. Like for CS, when I was taking that CS course, um, I would have Harshal explain the concepts to me, and then I just go and practice them on my own. And that helped me kind of doing that repeatedly over and over again outside of the class helped me understand what I was doing. So to make a long story short, some type of classes it works, and some classes it doesn't. It takes some experience to figure out what types of classes you can get away with skipping classes. But once you figure that out, you'd find self-studying to be a lot more helpful. But just a point of practice is, at the very least, even if you know self-studying is going to help you, just attend like the first 3 weeks of classes anyway. You never know what can pop up.
Yeah, so kind of going off on what Ryan said, definitely like some classes are a lot harder to self-study on. For example, like math classes, like at least for me, especially like the proof heavy ones, where like sometimes it's like just these like light bulb ideas where it's like, oh, like you bring this piece over here and like combine this logic or whatever. Like sometimes you just need someone to like explain that to you to get it faster. Like sure, like okay, maybe you can read through it. Maybe this is similar to philosophy. Maybe like you can read through it again and again, like talk with yourself, whatever. But it's like not as efficient, I'd say, as going to classes. So I guess another point is like for me, I've only ever skipped like probably fewer than 3 classes through my like entire undergrad grad. So I'm the type of person that will attend every class pretty much. Occasionally like I get distracted during the classes if the lectures get boring, but I still like to be there because you know you never know, as Ryan said, when something useful might get said. Not just like, oh, maybe like this will be on the exam, but just in general, like, oh, this is good knowledge for me to keep. So I think something else you should think about is that like, okay, like Cal State LA tuition is like significantly cheaper than like my current master's degree tuition. But like you are paying for this. And so if you're like paying a bunch of money and you're choosing not to go to all your classes just so you can get like that degree slip of paper, I personally think that you're cheating yourself by not doing that. Certainly like for me, I like self-studying topics that I don't learn from classes, or like there is no class for it at Cal State or something like that, right? Or it's like different topics that I'm interested in but don't want to take a class for. Like I'll go online, like I'll watch, you know, YouTube videos, you know, do whatever to self-study. But if it's like 4 classes, generally for me, like I don't skip. I think it's, you know, usually like okay, sometimes like okay, you can skip and get the A, but you know, if you're looking for the knowledge, I'd say probably try and like get your money's worth, and try and actually learn by going to classes. Or at least like, you know, maybe you can ask questions to the professors. Like for me right now, like some of my, actually pretty much all my classes, I think I'd say I ask a decent bit of questions. And especially like the CMU professors here, like they have really good answers. So I'm like, it's always really interesting for me to like get some extra insights out of classes. So I'd say that attending is generally like a good thing.
I think like Alvin, I also in undergrad, I don't really remember ever skipping class. But in general, I was also really lucky that I had really excellent professors. So Ryan had talked about how this like self-studying is class dependent. I also think it's hugely professor dependent. Because some professors are just horrendous, right? Like especially if you're in the chem department, you're taking OChem, like you know that there's definitely people you want to take it with and people you don't. Um, and I mean, that's true, I'm sure, across departments and several disciplines. And so for me, a lot of it in undergrad, I didn't really skip classes because I generally went into classes like having studied for the lecture beforehand. And so for me, lecture was more of just like a review or the professor pointing out to me what content they cared about. So I knew, okay, when I come back to this to review for an exam, like this is what they wanted me to focus on, right? Because sometimes there's a really high density in textbooks and things like that that just doesn't make sense to try and master all of it. So, in undergrad generally recommend like going to classes, and I actually think, especially also in like my humanities classes, I really, really loved going to my humanities classes because it was just like a different, like, things are more discussion based versus more lecture based, and it was like a good sort of change of pace, and I really just liked hearing what my professors and also what my classmates had to say. Um, but now in grad school, things have changed. So, I like there are classes. It comes down to the professor and the structure of the course. So, like Alvin was saying, he's taking ML. When I took ML, I don't think I went to class like 5 times in the whole quarter. So and I did fine in the class. Like I was able to learn what I needed to learn, but it's just the professor was posting lectures online. The timing of the class didn't work with my lab schedule, so I would just watch the videos at home, and that just worked for me. So I would say, like you don't be super rigid about it of like, okay, I have to go to class. But know that going to class is in general, like Alvin said, a really good thing. Um, and if you are self-studying, so I had to do a lot of this, especially actually this quarter, I'm taking a class where there's 7 professors in 10 weeks. So it's a lot of you're not really getting a lot of the same things. It's kind of hard to learn from the lectures themselves. So I've been doing a lot of that self-studying. And so there are some things I would recommend. I think one thing is that you would be surprised how many people have like online YouTube lecture videos of the subjects that you're interested in, or whatever you're studying. I would highly recommend finding some of those and at least like getting someone to explain it to you. Um, and I mean the caveat there is if you're someone who can really digest textbooks really well, that's great. The class that I'm doing this for does not have a very well written textbook. So getting someone to explain things to me through in some avenue has been really helpful for me. So I'd really recommend doing that. And I would also say like you don't have to be stuck to the textbook that your professor assigns you. So, um, when I took OChem at Cal State LA, the textbook's fine, as I'm sure everyone knows. The professors can be a little bit less fine. And I also took OChem, my first OChem one was half online, second was all online. And so it was a little tough. Besides OChem also being a tough course. And while the textbook was great, I had a different textbook that I found online that was leagues more helpful than the one like the Cardi or whatever it is that they assign us in school. Um, and so that's another big piece of advice I would get is if you're not learning from your textbook, it's probably not the only textbook out there. So feel free to like poke around, see what other schools are using, other classes have been using. And I think that can be really helpful. And yeah, I guess, and then last piece, in terms of what types of classes this works best with, I mean, anything that's not discussion based, you can probably get away with self-studying. But I would say for the classes, when you're thinking about whether you want to self-study or not, really think about the professor and like if they're a good professor, going to class will probably help you a lot just because you'll learn a lot from someone who knows the topic and is excited to teach. And if you go to grad school, sometimes you'll come across professors who are part of the institution for the research funding more than the like teaching aspect, which is totally fine. And then it's fine to make that decision for yourself. You just want to make sure that you're being productive, and to maximize productivity in the way that makes sense for you.
Yeah, I think I just have
Class
to
study.
real quickly. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Alvin. Go
Okay.
ahead.
I just really quickly have to mention that point about the professors and the YouTube videos. So I took physics at Cal State LA when it was online, and the professor may or may not have just not taught anything for the first like 4 weeks. Like there was no class. Like it was online. Like he posts like a note, like a few pages of notes, like every like I don't know, like 2 weeks. So I was like I need to get something out of this. So I went online and I watched I think Walter Lewin's like Physics 1 and 2 series from MIT. They're like top-notch lectures. Like I personally really like them. And so that's what I learned from. Like I went to class for the sake of seeing what the professor like would cover compared to the MIT lectures. Because like in the end I needed to take the exam for the Cal State LA class. But yeah, definitely if you have like bad professors, then like yeah, like attending, you're probably not going to learn as much. It might more be for the sake of like getting the A, which is unfortunate, but I think that's a goal that a lot of us, especially EPsters, I think have. And then one more thing too is like, for example, I watched like Stanford's CS229 series from Andrew Ng on machine learning, like before I even took the 2 machine learning classes at Cal State LA. And I'd say that like one class like covered like twice as much as like the 2 classes at Cal State LA did. And like my current machine learning class too, like is covering like 3 times the content of the ones back then. So like it was a little boring for me sitting through some of those classes. Like as Nikki said, it felt kind of more like review and just kind of like, hearing it again just to like reinforce the topic. So there are going to definitely be classes where you can get away with skipping, especially if the lectures are recorded. I think it's personal preference, like kind of like what Ryan said, like you kind of have to decide like, what do I want out of this class, right? Because sometimes, maybe you just kind of have to get through it and you don't really have an option and you're just trying to like learn as much as possible or something. And if the professor or like the class structure is not helpful for that, then you just kind of have to work your way around it.
Yeah, I will say, building on what both Nikita and Alvin have been talking about, is most of the classes that I did skip were because the professor was bad. It just so happened that they happened to be in. It's coincidence that they were subjects where there's a lot of material online that you can use for self-teaching, like CS and accounting. It's not like it's not like a class where you have to go in for discussion. There's a lot of material online, and I was fortunate enough that the 2 of the worst professors I've had at Cal State LA were in those classes. Senioritis didn't help, definitely, but the learning objectives do matter. At that point, I was taking CS. I was taking CS because I just needed the units, man. I just needed the poli sci is not a very unit intensive major, and I wanted to branch out. Same thing with statistics. Although statistics, the guy was a good professor. Um, and then what was the other course? Oh, accounting. Yeah, just branching out, filling up my knowledge. And so learning objectives do matter. What you want out of a class does matter, but generally speaking, I would recommend going to class if it must be done. Because like you said, class is more than just class. I feel like self-teaching has been kind of glorified, but what I feel like what they miss out on is that there's some for most students, you're paying for not just the you're not just paying for the degree, you're also paying for the structure that comes with said degree so that you can focus entirely on learning. Don't discount that aspect of classes and only deviate from it when your circumstances absolutely demand it, like when you're not learning something or when you have too many scheduling conflicts.
Yeah, like one more thing is like classes, the ideal goal is for them to be designed well enough to where they're teaching you a lot more than you can ever learn on your own, right? So certainly, especially for grad school here, like I'm currently taking a PhD level statistics class, which maybe I regret a little because I didn't have much background from Cal State LA. But it's taught by like a professor who like really knows his stuff. Like he wrote like 2 major textbooks in the field. And so I like genuinely, I don't think I can ever get this type of knowledge just from going on the internet on my own. Because even like some of the topics, like I can look for like non-parametric inference or like causal inference or like some advanced like statistical theory stuff online, and I won't even find that. Like once you get to a certain point, I think the classes are very helpful. And then like another CMU class I took, like the professors that like created the class, like wrote the textbooks, like at that point, it's really valuable. So you gotta remember that classes are designed to be instructive in the end, right?
I guess this next question kind of covers some topics we touched on in this last question, but in terms of, I guess, falling under the topic of self-studying, in classes where the content is relatively simple or where you, like Alvin said, where you've learned a lot of the content before and classes are mostly just review or discussion, do you try to work ahead in your classes? And if so, is it just to the extent of like reviewing the notes before reviewing the notes before the lecture, or is it to the extent of like working several weeks ahead and getting the assignments done? And if so, do you recommend it? And advantages, disadvantages?
I guess
Go, Alvin.
okay. I guess if no one else will start, I guess I'll start first. I think working ahead, for those who know me, I typically work like decently ahead. So like I pretty rarely turn in things on the day it's due. Like, okay, I might like turn them in kind of close every now and then. But in general, like I think I do stuff pretty early. Like there are people here at CMU or some of my friends that are like even faster than me, and sometimes I'm like, wow, I gotta catch up. But I like for me at least, it removes a lot of the stress when you work ahead. And I feel like that also like that improves my mental health, first of all, because like every day I'm not like, oh shoot, deadline, 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 you know. So I don't really like working like deadline to deadline. Um, there are some classes where if I really lack the motivation, unfortunately, I will do the stuff closer to the deadline. But generally, I like, you know, starting, I guess it depends on how long the like assignment period is for, right? But I like starting towards the beginning. And even if I like kind of drag it out and don't finish immediately at the beginning, I kind of like spreading out the work a little bit. And for me at least, it like I feel a little bit more confident as well when I'm able to like get a little bit ahead. Um, because one of the things I hate the most is like when I feel like I'm falling behind and I'm like, I will never catch up. Like that is that's a hard feeling. Especially like when like a realization hits you. Like I have a midterm tomorrow and I have a lot of content to go through still. Like that's not a pleasant feeling for me. I haven't had it very often, but I definitely don't want to experience that. So for pretty much all classes, I try and work a little ahead. There are some where it's harder. Um, I guess I'm like it's hard for me to say like what types in particular. It's also a little based on like the class structure. Like if your professor posts lecture notes only after they give the lecture, then it's kind of hard, right? So you just kind of have to see which class. My opinion in general is that it's helpful, but you know it could depend on the person as well.
Do you want to go first before I talk too much? Okay. So for me, it depends on what you define as studying ahead. For me, it was always an expectation that when you come into the class, you have done the reading and you're ready to discuss or ask questions. So for me, that's not considered, I do not consider that studying ahead. I consider that just a bare prerequisite of the class. And so by that definition, so if you incorporate that definition for my major course for my philosophy courses, because they were so discussion based, it was kind of difficult to study ahead. There was one time I had to do it where the author of the main author that I was going to be writing my final on was the last author that we would read. At that point, it's just unavoidable that I would have to do some reading ahead. And what I did is because of the way the class was structured, I was able to sacrifice the current readings that we were doing to avoid so that I could allocate it. So there was a trade-off. I wouldn't have done it in any other semester outside the pandemic, though, for this course. So, but in classes like even statistics to a certain extent, I was able to study ahead because it just helped me get a firmer grasp of the material. When concepts build upon each other like they do as they do so beautifully in STEM, which is one of the advantages of STEM to humanities, is that STEM, the concepts build on each other. So whereas humanities, it's kind of just like, well, I read this guy and then I read this guy and they don't really seem to connect. It's like, yeah, don't suck it. That's just the nature of the course. But um, classes where the concepts really do build on one another, it is very help and there's a lot of self-study material available. It really does help to study ahead. Now, applying this more to like a professional setting where deadlines are very important, what I'll often do is generally speak, the most time sensitive materials I have to work on, I'll have anywhere between 10 to 25 days to get them in. And because I'm not because of my position, everything that I do needs to be reviewed by an attorney, which is there's two people that have to review every single time. One guy, the first guy checks for legal accuracy, and the second, my boss checks for factual accuracy, and I have to account for that when they go through. So I have to, in a certain sense, kind of like get my work done a little bit faster because I have to account for the time that it takes for them to respond. So for this most recent case that I had, we got the judge's decision on the 2nd, and we had 25 days to challenge his decision. So that would be the 27th. I had the final draft. I had my personal final draft done and reviewed by the first guy by the 20th a Monday? Whatever that Monday was before Thanksgiving is when I had that first draft done and reviewed. And I sent it to my boss for factual accuracy. You just have to, in a certain sense, I guess you could call that working ahead. But again, I don't really consider stuff that's just part of what you're going to have to do. It's not really working ahead. And so you can't say, oh, I worked ahead because I did the reading before I did the reading and came ready to discuss it in class. That's not working ahead. And yeah.
Yeah, I would say that I think Ryan and I, we have the same sort of line of logic of like what it means to work ahead. And by that reasoning, I don't think I ever work ahead. So, and that's just not, I don't function that way. Like I don't, for example, in immunology, like I don't need to be 3 weeks ahead of the material. If I'm going to class and the course is covering, one topic, I want to be most aware of that topic that day. So, I know that I guess, to each their own in terms of in STEM classes, whether you like to kind of review the material before or after. I always try my best to treat the lecture as the review. It doesn't always work out, but I just prefer kind of going into lecture with definitely not mastery, but at least not a total loss of like, I have no idea what we're going to talk about today. I have no idea what this vocabulary is. And I think especially in grad school and especially here I've been taking some of the like biophysics, medical physics classes where you're hearing from experts in the field. And so when you're hearing from experts in the field don't always realize that you're not an expert in the field. So they'll use a lot of vocabulary that you just don't know, right? Or like I've had people literally present like slides from like their old theses defenses and like things that are extremely technical to the class as if we're just supposed to understand. Because I mean, the professors I think are coming in with I think Stanford has a really huge culture of self-studying. So people are like, they just know that we'll look it up later. But I always feel sort of overwhelmed and lost when that happens to me in class. And so I like to kind of have as much grounding as I can give myself beforehand. I try and do that just so that it helps me also pay attention in class because when I'm feeling super lost, I'll just get kind of like everything is just going over my head. And then I'm not being productive or effective when I'm there. So I prefer to just have some sort of a little bit of background in the content before I go to class. That's been especially true in grad school. Again, just because a lot of times you're hearing from people who don't realize that they're talking to students. And I think my degree is in bioengineering, and so that's a really cross-disciplinary field. I'm taking physics classes, engineering classes, biology classes, and my peers and I, we all come from different backgrounds. And so it's also hard on the part of the professor, right, to sort of cater to all of those differences. And so I mean, the point here is that I think it's good to always go in with a little bit of, as much more is better, but I think having some background is always good, right? Because then you're not feeling lost and you're not feeling overwhelmed with sometimes the sheer density of like content that a professor is speaking about. And then in terms of like, I guess like how I manage working ahead. I think, like Alvin, I hate deadline to deadline. I don't do well when things are due at 11:59 and I'm working on at 11:50. That stresses me out so much. I just can't. So I try and when I structure my weeks and think about, this is what I need to get done in the week, I try and pull the like content reviews or the homework or whatever it might be away from the deadline. So for example, I have class tomorrow, and so I did the review for the class today, rather than tomorrow morning or tomorrow right after class. And same thing with I have like homework due on Friday. I finished it today. So that's just what works for me, is like just trying to know what I need to get done sort of at what part of the week. And that's just been my sort of effective method. If you count that as working ahead, then that's how I work ahead, is just kind of structuring it around class timing and things of that nature. And yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to whether you should or should not work ahead, again, it's very much up to you. But with I think a huge part of that's echoing what Ryan said, right? Like if you're the part of the class is to go in having read something and you read it in the morning and you say you worked ahead. Now you haven't. You've just done the work that you need to do for the class. Um, but yeah, I mean, but I'm someone I would never like, I'm not going to study next week's lecture today or like whatever. Like, I don't need to, I don't want to. So, I never really saw a point in doing that. But if that's your thing, that's your thing. Definitely, no problems there. But yeah, I would just recommend, like, if you are that kind of person, just be mindful of like when you structure or how you structure your time so that you feel adequately prepped or adequately sort of ahead in your classes, so that you'll feel successful for them.
Jump in really quickly there because I'm the person. You guys. I don't know how much you guys, as graduate students, the pressure of deadlines. Like judges are picky people, and litigation is like you deadlines, deadlines, deadlines. So I don't really have a choice. I have kind of like that unfortunate like that double curse, the double edged, I don't know what to call it, but I can't avoid deadlines and I just can't work ahead sometimes. Like for in my field, sometimes a medical report will take 30 days to come in, 35 days. I can't do anything for 30 to 35 days on that case. And so sometimes you just have to, and so sometimes you just kind of have to accept, at least on my end, that you're going to have to deal with a deadline and it might involve some late nights. It might involve some stress on your end. And deadlines are, especially as you start, more so as you start working at, I know both of you guys have worked in some capacity in like professional fields. So I don't know if your experience is as similar to me, how similar, how different it is. But for me, it's like deadlines are unavoidable and and working ahead can be very difficult. And so for me, I've had to kind of, even though I'm not studying, I'm working, I found myself having to kind of adjust my tendencies to work ahead in certain things and just say, okay, I can't do any more on this. Stop trying to plan ahead on this case and just wait till the material, wait until the evidence gets in, and then you can look at it later. And I just have to, for me, that's just, I just had to accept that and make peace with that, regardless of how difficult that was for me. And it's going to happen. It's going to happen, especially if you want to work in the professional sector, in a profession where there are busy seasons and there are slow seasons, and where there's deadlines. Sometimes there's a lot of deadlines and sometimes there's not. And so, yeah, you're just going to have to break your preferences sometimes, and that's okay.
Yeah, it's definitely a little different, like in a professional setting or like, I guess, outside of school. Like in the school aspect, it's like there are work deadlines, but or like homework deadlines are like, oh, the test is coming up. I guess school is something where it's a little easier for you to like predict, like, or to know it's coming. So as Ryan said, like, yeah, okay, sometimes it's just unavoidable. Like you're at work, like, oh, like they asked you to like do this task, right? Or like, oh, code this up or something, right? And like, yeah, like I couldn't anticipate that. And obviously I couldn't predict the future and work on that ahead like a week ago. So for classes, it's a little different, I think, for sure, because you can think, oh, like I know this test is coming up, so I can like already kind of mentally think about it. But also, as Nikki said, I also like, even if I've tried to like get like 3 weeks ahead, like it doesn't really work. Like it's a little inefficient too, in my opinion, because when you're too far off of like the pacing of the course, then you're kind of like, I don't know. I just feel like it's not for me. So it depends on like the task, like also like depends on whether you're like actually working or whether it's school. But just kind of like find a rhythm that works for you. If you really are the type of person that likes to do things at 11:58 p.m., I have a lot of friends that, concerning amount of friends that enjoy doing that. Um, and I like there's definitely Eepsters that like doing that too. I mean, it's like if it really works for you and you feel like you learn more that way, then I guess that's okay too. And maybe you'll enjoy like a professional setting like Ryan's where you have a bunch of deadlines like that.
Yeah, I think the sum of what both Ryan and Alvin said, and this is important whether you're in industry or in school, whatever, is just be flexible. Like it's good to have a plan, it's good to have structure, but sometimes it's things happen, things come up. Whether that's in school, in terms of you have something like an outside commitment that comes up that you have to take care of and it throws off your studying schedule, like know that it's okay. Like it's sometimes those things happen and it's fine. And I guess also be aware that they could, like those things could happen at any time, right? So if you're once in a while having to stress over a paper or whatever it might be because you didn't have the time to work ahead on it or, that's okay. Like you're not alone. It's gonna happen. And I think, like Ryan said, when you're in industry, these things come up. Where you're doing something and it doesn't work, so now your whole plan is shifted, or you're doing something and you're waiting on something and now your whole plan is shifted. So um don't as much, I know it's always much easier said than done, but as much as you can, like have an open mind, be flexible and don't over stress about things that you couldn't have foreseen happening. It's not something you could have dealt with. So.
Well, thank you all for your answers. It's really great to have people from such varied fields because we get to hear a lot of different answers. And once again, thank you. And to end off the panel, we wanted to ask one like final question about after classes, like after we learn all this material, how do you retain knowledge after taking a class? And do you feel that there's a certain type of content that's more valuable to retain than others? And how do you decide?
All content is felt. No, I'm joking. You'd be surprised at what type of things you learn that you find yourself having an interest in. So, um, I don't know what for Alvin and Nikita, I don't know what your honors 1200 class was like, but mine was with Dr. Calabrese. Did either of you guys have Dr. Calabrese? That class is epic because we were at Dante's Inferno and we compared it to like three LA bands and we incorporated that. I still remember those lectures. I still remember those songs. I still remember what I analyzed in each song and I still remember the essays that I wrote and I go back to them. I'm like, I could have wrote these a lot better, but I'm really glad that I did because it opened my perspective. Um, and so you just never know what'll interest you in a class. And I didn't find myself interested in 1960s psychedelic rock, but here I am, and I still listen to it. I listen to the genre every now and then. Who would have thought? But in terms of retaining knowledge, you'll if you really like something, you'll remember it. You'll remember it whether it's in your field or when it's not. Um, uh, in my field, like I still have all my political philosophy class notes with Dr. McClendon. I still have. I saved them because that's how much the class has meant to me. That's how much I learned from those classes. And every now and then I'll do some extra reading on the side on the philosophers and the arguments that I'm interested in. So in terms of retaining knowledge, this is where the study habits this is particularly where good study habits combined with an interest in the subject. This is how you are best able to remember knowledge because when you're the best study habits study to retain knowledge as opposed to cram knowledge. Sometimes, yes, you're doing it because you have to, and that's fine. But don't make that don't make that a constant. Like one class a semester that you're doing because you have to do it, that's fine. Um, but if you're interested in the class, you had good habits, and it doesn't matter what piqued the interest, whether it was your interest before or a professor's interest that drew you in. Chances are you'll probably remember what you learned. And so what you remember is more a function of what you found interesting than like I don't remember anything I learned from biology. I just don't because I did not find that class interesting. But, you know, I remember stuff from CS or accounting because I had a bit of knowledge, a bit of interest in that subject before I went into it. And political philosophy, man, I did not. I was on a completely different track for my poli sci degree, but the most of the classes that I took were political philosophy. So because I was at that point, I was just drawn into it, and that's what I remember to this day.
Yeah, so pretty much what Ryan said, I think usually it comes down to interest. Like, unfortunately, the classes that I weren't very interested in, it's very hard for me to think back and like remember things. Even if I did very well in those classes or like I worked decently hard, like if I didn't actively like while studying, I didn't try and like make connections or like critically think about them in my brain while taking the class, it's a lot harder to remember. Now, for CS in particular, in my opinion, like it's probably pretty different from a lot of other majors in the sense that a lot of the knowledge builds up. Like, while I was going through like my undergrad classes, right, in CS, it's like each class, like it helps to know the class before and to remember it really well. So for me, there was like this constant cycle of like reinforcement. Like I would see similar topics again, I'd make the connection, I'd like refresh myself on it, and like the content would really stick. Like to the point where so we have like a recap class at Cal State LA for computer science. It's a little annoying, I guess. A lot of people don't really like it. Pretty much what it is, it's like it's just a class that will make you review all of the content of like the core classes from before. And it's like back to back, kind of like you just like take quizzes, exams, whatever. And then you take like some standardized test at the end. And for that one, like at least for me, because I felt like I'd studied like the content pretty well, like when I was taking the classes, and I kept applying the knowledge, right? Like during my internships, like obviously all the knowledge comes out. Maybe not all of it, but a lot of it does, come out. You practice it, you see it in other places, and you kind of like think back to it. So for me, for that class, like I got away with like barely studying, and like in terms of that class, like it wasn't really teaching me anything new, so like it was okay in my eyes to not really do too much special. But I could get away with like not really studying and then ending up with the top score in the entire CS department. So for like as Ryan said, like if you studied well in the classes themselves, like all of that is going to like continue building off and like paying off in the future. So that's part of the reason actually that I don't like cramming or like studying right before deadlines or like, for exams, because I find that I forget information really darn quickly. If I studied it the night before, took the exam, and now my mind's empty. Like you compare that to, for example, like, oh, I was studying like a little bit like ahead, I was studying a little bit each day, then like, it's a lot easier for me to remember it. In terms of like content being valuable, like the stuff that you'll use is gonna end up more valuable. So as Ryan said, like it's probably not as important for him to remember all his math as it might be for me, because it's kind of coming back to get me. Or like maybe not get me, but like it comes back for me probably more often than a lot of other majors. So yeah, sadly, like the ones that are more applicable to what you're interested in is going to be more important to remember. So I guess maybe that's not too much of a sad thing, because hopefully like your interests align with like what you're doing. And in that sense, like if you're interested in it, like it's good information, like you remember it well, you just kind of want to find something like, that you enjoy learning. Kind of like in the end, right? Like one of the main reasons you're like even doing a degree, like whether it's undergrad, whether it's like grad, whatever, right? Like high school, okay, I guess most of us didn't go to high school, but like middle school, whatever, elementary school, like we were forced to do it because it was like school, right? But why do like people even do like these advanced degrees or whatever? It's like to explore your passion, right? To learn. So definitely don't try and just get through it without like remembering anything. I think that's like a waste of your time entirely. So just like try your best to learn each of the topics very well. Try and like make the connections, even if you're not interested in a topic, right? Sometimes like you connect it to something else you're interested in and you're like, wow, that's like very cool, right? So try not to forget everything. Kind of like stay interested in the topics that you enjoy. And I'd say like as long as you do your best, like I think it will, the knowledge that you need will probably stick pretty well.
Yeah, I know we're running out of time, but I just want to echo that, like, I think that last sentiment, especially of like, the stuff that you really need to know, you will remember, and the stuff that you liked, you'll also remember. That's basically what it's going to come down to, right? So, I guess an example is like for me, I took AP Physics before I came to EEP, and so I never thought I would ever do physics again. And then I took physics classes, and then it came back to me because I knew I thought I would have to would have had to remember it the time I was studying, and so it came back pretty quickly. Um, I think a huge thing is like, can I sit around and derive the wave equations from scratch like really quickly? No, right? But if you show me the wave equations, I would like know what it sort of looked like. And now that I'm like doing things with ultrasound, like I can apply them. So I think it's more important that you pull away big picture, especially when you're in STEM. Like it's more important that you can pull away big picture. If you're in the chem biochem department, like if you're taking biochem, especially with certain professors, you'll learn a bunch of stuff that you're just never ever going to see again. But you should hopefully remember like these are the steps, like the general steps of glycolysis, and this is generally what happens in the Krebs, like things of that nature. And I think it's just more important that you can step back from a class and say like, okay, if I was given a diagram, I could explain what was going on. And Alan can maybe say similarly, like in terms of like coding, right? Given a problem with that would require like similar structure of thinking, you could solve it. Or same thing with like proofs and math, given a problem with a lot of the same like sort of lines of logic, you can figure it out. We should always be your main takeaway from a class, especially the important classes or the classes that are important either for your future that you just like and are important to you. Yeah, and I mean, if that's how you know you're being effective in your studying, right? When you can say like, yes, if you asked me a question, I could kind of give you an answer. That's to me is always you've taken a lot away from what you'll get. And I wouldn't be overly concerned about like, oh, I don't remember what this was or this is. It's not about active memory, right? Those things, if you did a good job with how you studied and you did a good job in the class, those things will be stored away. And when it comes back to you having to see these equations again or see this concept again, it should come back quickly. And if it doesn't, you're well primed to quickly kind of get the review that you need. So yeah, like Ryan and Alvin said, if you like it, you'll remember it. If you need it, you'll remember that too.
Well, that's all our questions for today. Thank you all for coming here and giving your really great insight. I really appreciate it. It's been really useful for me in particular. And sorry, it's been really useful for me to see what I've been doing, what I haven't been doing, and what I still need to implement. And once again, thanks so much for coming. I know it's a weekday. I know it's late, especially for Alvin. So thank you so much for coming. And Stowina, do you have any final words?
No, I just want to echo what Samuel said. I think it's been a really great panel, especially since our panelists are from such diverse backgrounds, both in their undergrad, what major they pursued and what kind of areas they were studying, and then also now after CSULA, what all of our panelists are doing, I think are very diverse, and I think that was reflected in a lot of the answers. And I think for me personally as well, it was very helpful to see kind of reflect on what I've been doing throughout the past 4 years at CSULA, and then what are some potential areas of improvement. So I think it's been very helpful for me, and I'm sure it's very helpful for the viewers of this panel.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.